CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. More pain for borrowers as interest rates rise yet again in Europe and the UK.
Our other headlines: oil giant Shell more than doubles its annual profit to nearly $40 billion, one of the biggest profits in British company history.
Turbocharging China's economy. Beijing's IPO revolution to try and stimulate the market and accelerate recovery.
And a picture is worth 1,000 words. A professor in Slovakia revealing the secrets of Chinese calligraphy.
The Bank of England has raised its base rate to the highest level in 14 years.
It raised interest rates by half a percentage point to 4%, but the UK central bank says there are signs that soaring inflation has turned a corner. The European Central Bank also raised rates by half a percentage point. The key benchmark is now 2.5%, with the bank's president warning of more rises to come. The US Federal Reserve opted for a smaller rate rise of 25 basis points to a range of 4.5% to 4.75%. That is the smallest increase in nearly 12 months. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Trent Murray, watching events for us in Berlin. Well, no surprise, really. This is kind of what we all expected, isn't it?
It is, Jamie. I mean, the markets had really priced in certainly the ECB rate rise at 50 basis points, as well as the Bank of England. I think what all of the central banks certainly agree on is that inflation does remain a real problem in both Europe and the United States. The question is just how bad is it? Now, what we do know is that in the Eurozone, inflation peaked in October at 10.6%, a record high. It has steadily been falling, though. The latest data that we have from January suggests that it has fallen to 8.5% across the Eurozone. That is still well beyond the 2% target of the ECB, but it's certainly heading in the right direction. But certainly what we are seeing from the central bank and also from the Board of Governors is that they think more work needs to be done to get it down and faster. That is why they are going for these big 50 basis points rate rises. They believe that that is the way really to try and get there quickly. What we also heard, though, from Christine Lagarde, who is the president of the ECB, is that in her view, the overall economic and inflationary outlook is becoming more balanced. And what she meant by that is, on one hand, she says Russia's war against Ukraine puts significant downward risk to the European economy. It could still push up food prices and energy prices again. She also said that if the world economy weakens then more than expected, that will hurt the EU, the Eurozone economy. She also flagged that recovery could face obstacles if we saw any sort of resurgence of COVID-19 and the pandemic was to re-intensify. Then on the other hand, though, she said there are reasons for optimism. She said the energy shock that Europe is facing could fade away faster than anticipated. She said European companies could adapt quicker to some of these challenges. And interestingly, she noted that the expected economic rebound in China could give a fresh boost to commodity prices and foreign demand. So a bit of a mixed picture from the ECB in terms of what may be coming. But what they do all agree on, it seems, on that board is that right now the inflation number is just too high and they're going to really take a baseball bat to it using those big rate rises of 50 basis points.
So just to be clear, despite inflation cooling, the European Central Bank still planning another 50 basis points rise in March, come what may, whatever.
That is what they said, that at their next meeting come March, they will go for another 50 basis point rate rise, clearly taking a view that that is the way to get the number down faster than otherwise. What we, of course, see is that is a different approach to what we've seen with the Reserve Bank in the United States. They have been a little bit more dovish with their 25 basis point rate rise. It will, of course, make cost of living more difficult for many borrowers, but in order to try and get food and energy prices down, it seems that the ECB thinks that by raising the cost of borrowing, it will eventually help both households and companies who are just struggling with this cost of living crisis across Europe. Let's have a listen to what Christine Lagarde had to say about some of those rate rises.
I get it. Headline inflation has gone down, and more so than we had expected, and that many had expected. But underlying inflation pressure is there, alive and kicking, which is why we are committing, as we are intending, as we intend in this monetary policy statement, and this is why I say that we have more ground to cover and we are not done.
I mean, it's very interesting that we're hearing all of these warnings as well about the economic headwinds ahead, and yet at the same time we are seeing just record profits. We've seen today, Jamie, here in Germany, Deutsche Bank, Germany's biggest bank, one of the Eurozone's biggest bank, announcing its highest profit in 15 years. They have made a net profit in the past year of over $5 billion US dollars. It is an extraordinary turnaround for a bank that was losing money not so long ago, and it shows that certainly in one sector, the banking sector, things seem to be doing quite well within the Eurozone.
Trent, thank you for that. Our correspondent, Trent Murray, in Berlin.
So that's the picture in Europe. But in the United States, the Federal Reserve has also warned that further rate rises will be necessary to bring down inflation. It's currently at 8.5%, well above the target of 2%. Let's talk to our correspondent, John Terrett, in New York. So, John, what's the reaction been to the Fed's announcement?
Well, this is a very interesting discussion indeed, and it's being held in offices all over Wall Street right at this very moment. I mean, what happened yesterday evening, Wednesday, here, was that the Federal Reserve did indeed raise interest rates, as you said, by 25 basis points. Now, there was no great shock here, not really, because everybody had been expecting that. It had kind of been baked into the pie, as they say here. I do think, however, we came closer to a 50 basis point hike than we realized, as it happens. But anyway, we didn't. It was 25 basis points. And the point about that is that the Federal Reserve is still pushing up interest rates to cure that 8% inflation that you were talking about, but by far, far less than we got used to in most of 2022. I'm rather fond of saying in the whole of 2022, and it's actually not true, because it was about a year ago, almost to the day, that we had our first 25 basis point interest rate hike at the beginning of this cycle. But of course, we then went on to 4 75 basis point jumbo rate hikes, which really seemed to begin to bring down inflation. Now, the point about this is that although that 25 basis point hike had been baked in, what was not baked in was the words from the chairman of the central bank, Jerome Powell, who gave a news conference half an hour later. And I just made a note of some of the key things. He was very, very hawkish, as the Americans say, very hawkish. In other words, he was aggressive about it, really. And he said there's more work to be done. He signaled there's almost certainly going to be a hike now when they meet again in March. He talked about that they haven't discussed the terminal rate, which means they haven't discussed at what point they're going to stop hiking interest rates. He said they haven't discussed what the next path forward is. And he also called on the Congress to go ahead and raise the debt ceiling. Well, the effect of all this was that immediately the markets, which had been kind of a bit flat going into all of this, sold off big time. There was lots and lots of red on the screen. But they all came back again, very much into the green later on in the day. So it just goes to show that we are in totally uncharted territory, as I've said a million times on our program before, Robin and Jamie.
And, John, this uncharted territory is causing some confusion.
Well, it is. It really is. And there really are discussions going on all over the place here about where we're really going to end up at the end of 2023. It doesn't matter which economist you talk to. They all have a different view on whether there will be a recession or whether one will be avoided, or if there is a recession, whether it will be shallow or deep. I mean, the R word is very much on everybody's minds. And a lot of economists are wondering, why was it that Wall Street rallied so strongly yesterday again after falling so far when this news came out, given the fact that the chairman was so hawkish in pretty much everything he said? And the answer to that is that Wall Street has convinced itself that it's at war with the Fed. It has convinced itself that this inflation issue that we're in is going to self-correct. That's what it thinks is going to happen. Now, if you read the textbooks will tell you that can't happen. No, that's wrong. This cannot. There will be a recession by the second half of 2023. It's just not how it works. And the point about this is that the labour market here is very, very robust, and you can't really have a recession if you've got such a strong labour market. Only yesterday we learned that 11 million jobs are open in the United States right now. That's so high that it's causing some economists to question whether that figure is even correct. Bearing in mind that there's all this recession talk, and also thousands of people are being laid off in America right now, all over the country, in all sorts of jobs, mainly technology. So that's the conundrum that we find ourselves in. The next clue to this will be on Friday when we have the jobs report. If it's too hot or too cold, if it's not just a Goldilocks report right in the middle, then the markets are going to move big time tomorrow morning. And this issue of jobs brings in the immigrant debate to the United States, particularly through the country's southern border. Because if you haven't got people to do these jobs, you can't have an economy that is going to grow in the future. Anyway, that's a debate for another day. Right now, the Dow is down 1/5 of 1%, but the Nasdaq's on course for a fifth week in a row in the green. It's up 2.8%, almost 3% today, and the S&P 500 is ahead by 1.3%. Guys?
John, thanks very much for that. Our correspondent John Terrett in New York.
Well, what about the European market reaction? Let's have a look at the scores on the doors. France's CAC closed up over 1.2%. The UK's FTSE up 0.5% a short while ago. Germany's DAX closed at just under 2% up. Well, let's talk to the distinguished international economist, Vicky Price. Vicky, for those of us who struggle with economics, help us here. Let's get this right. Wholesale gas prices have fallen. Global supply chain disruption appears to have calmed down. And yet the central banks are still saying inflation has probably peaked. So why more rate hikes?
It's a very interesting question, and you're right to be asking it, because obviously if you're entering a recessionary period, and I've just been listening to what you heard from the US and also, of course, what is going on in Europe, and also here, of course, in the UK, if you look at the latest Bank of England forecasts, then what you do normally, you try and stimulate the economy by reducing your interest rates. We're doing the opposite in all those places, and that is because there is a concern that perhaps inflation hasn't necessarily been won completely. The battle is still there because, first of all, you don't know what's going to happen with the war in Ukraine, but also wages, particularly in the US and in the UK, are rising. They may not be rising in line with inflation, but they're putting extra pressures on the economy, and that, of course, means that there could be a danger of not necessarily a wage price spiral, but certainly domestic inflation lingering for a lot longer. So I think they're being cautious. What this suggests, though, is that perhaps when inflation does fall, and the main reason for the fall, of course, is international factors, very little to do with what central banks have been doing recently, frankly, then we could see interest rates start coming down. And if you look at the latest forecast by the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of England, what they're anticipating is that we do get back, irrespective of what interest rates do from here on, to target levels for inflation, certainly sometime next year. So we're on course of achieving that. And yes, indeed, you may well ask, why are we still talking about raising rates even further?
There is, reading between the lines, a change in tone from the central banks, isn't there? I mean, there is a sense that the disinflation process is in traction. So perhaps a sign that perhaps we are heading out of the woods.
Yes, and I think we probably are, as I said, barring any sort of terrible happenings in Ukraine. But yes, it's a very simple arithmetical calculation that one needs to make. And basically, if energy prices stay where they are, of course, as we know, they have fallen significantly. Gas prices in Europe are below where they were pre-pandemic levels, which is really pre-invasion levels, pre-Russian invasion level in Ukraine, which is, of course, very good news. But even if they just stayed where they are at present, and if they stayed where they were even before the fall, then within a year, within a few months, if you're comparing year on year, you would have very low inflation, at least very low energy inflation. And that, of course, being so important in terms of the overall index, you would have had the overall inflation coming down significantly. But there are some issues there. And some of those have to do with all the extra costs that businesses have had to bear. If you look at food, for example, international food prices have been falling for the last 9 months, I think, consecutive months. But we don't see that yet at the shops because there have been all these built-in costs that are finally being charged onto the consumer. So that's basically why in the UK, retail food inflation is so high. When all those things start getting off the sort of year-on-year measure, then you could see those prices come down too, but they will take a little bit longer.
Vicky, good to see you. Thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme. The economist Vicky Price in London.
Oil giant Shell made its biggest ever profit last year, almost $40 billion. The figure is one of the highest profits ever posted by a British company. It's also almost double what the company posted the previous year and comes after record profits for other energy giants like Chevron and ExxonMobil, with the war in Ukraine driving up energy prices worldwide. Well, our correspondent Andrew Wilson is following the story for us. So, Andrew, record profits, but not a surprise.
No, because we saw this coming, the build-up of Shell and other oil companies, to be fair, back in 2022. By the third quarter, it was clear they were all having a bumper year, so it just needed the final figures for the final quarter of 2022 to be put on to come up with this figure of $40 billion, $10 billion in the last quarter, $8 billion expected, so even better than the analysts predicted, and they're romping home, there's no doubt about it. And this is the legacy of 2021 with the pandemic and all the supply chain disruption that happened there, and 2022, of course, with the war breaking out and the invasion of Ukraine and all the effect that that's had on energy supplies to Europe and beyond as well, and rearranging everyone's approaches towards where they get their energy from, but most specifically, of course, turning the fossil fuel product into a scarce commodity that, of course, shot up in price, and now they're reaping the benefits of that. It's going to upset a lot of people. It has upset a lot of politicians already, those who are wary of people in their constituencies who are having a hard time with paying their energy bills. So there's plenty of clamour now coming from the political sector for the fossil fuel companies to pay more in terms of windfall tax, to contribute more to the energy crisis. That may or may not happen. There are some slightly worrying figures. They don't pay that much tax, but then Shell doesn't do that much business in the UK. It may be based in London, but most of its activities, 95% in fact, are abroad, and they pay taxes over there. But they gave more in money, $6 billion, to their shareholders this year than they invest in renewables. So there is a picture laid bare for people to examine, but possibly it's just temporary. The windfalls of war is how one opposition politician put it. The oil and gas company Shell has had a great 2022, posting profits of nearly $40 billion last year. That's from worldwide operations. The UK, for example, accounts for just 5% of that market. But that comes against a backdrop of thousands of homes across Europe struggling to pay for energy, economizing to unhealthy levels, and families going short of food, light and heating, as inflation and the Ukrainian war really start to bite. It is one of the highest annual profits ever recorded by a British company, and comes as the Bank of England adds another hike to interest rates and therefore mortgage costs as well. But what's behind the price hikes is far from clear. When the Russian forces first invaded Ukrainian territory, the price of Brent crude reached nearly $128 a barrel, but has since fallen back to about $83. Gas prices also spiked, but have come down from their highs. All this as international pressure is growing to accelerate the conversion into renewables, with the energy giants insisting that fossil fuels are still the foundation of transport, lighting and heating around the world. The oil and gas giants have already been subject to a UK windfall tax, the Energy Profits Levy. Otherwise, Shell does not expect to pay UK tax this year because of deductible projects. The company says it paid out over $6 billion to shareholders at the end of 2022 and is planning another $4 billion share buyback. The UK public faces an energy price hike of up to 40% in April when the government price cap expires.
So is this going to change anything in UK government policy, do you think?
I think the general view is that we're in something of a cycle. I mean, it's all agreed at all points in the industry and in politics that this can't go on. We can't have fossil fuel companies making this kind of money. We can't keep burning this much fossil fuel because it's what it's doing to the planet and changing our environment and all the rest of it. And people can't keep scrabbling around to try and pay their energy bills. So things are coming to a head in some shape or form. It isn't quite clear yet how the cards are going to land, how long the peak in fossil fuel consumption is going to last, how long it's going to be before the big energy companies come up and embrace renewables. Renewables are growing more popular in Europe and the United States and around the world, so this is something that's knocking at the door to become the principal power source, but it hasn't quite happened yet, and so there will be political noise around this. But I suspect, as we've just been hearing on the economic chat a moment ago, we may have reached something of a peak here at the moment with the inflation crisis, and as that subsides, then the price of energy will subside as well. And also there is this issue that we haven't had the freezing cold winter that people were fearing, but there is the prospect of more violence in Ukraine in 2023. So these are all unknowns at the moment. But we are coming out of the winter period, and that's always favourable in terms of energy consumption. It's getting warmer again. Plenty to be happy about there.
Andrew, thank you very much. Our correspondent, Andrew Wilson. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the United States top diplomat is heading to China. What's on Antony Blinken's agenda? We're in Shanghai. Next.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Just a reminder that CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freevee.
US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is expected to visit China this weekend, signalling the two countries' continued desire to try to stabilise relations.
Blinken will meet his Chinese counterpart, Qin Gang. So, what will they talk about? Our correspondent Chen Tong reports.
Managing competition, strengthening cooperation and talking about Taiwan, Ukraine and the Korean Peninsula. That's all on the agenda for US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, according to the Department of State, when he visited China on Sunday. The most important topic, one expert says, would have to be Taiwan.
I think the Chinese side will, again, talk to the Americans that their policy has been interfering into Chinese domestic politics. But of course, on the American side, they would continue their so-called one China policy and try to counter China's argument that they insisted that China has been changing the so-called status quo. I think that there will be quite fierce arguments between the two sides on the Taiwan question. But it's very important for the two teams to talk about that because they have to manage their relations on this issue.
Shao believes this will be a crucial year for China-US relations. because US President Joe Biden will be facing another election in 2024. So the economic cooperation between the two sides will also be discussed during Blinken's visit.
Business community, they are trying to working very hard on this. But we have uncertainties on the U.S. side, especially Biden team's trade policy, trying to decoupling from China. But 2023 is an important year for President Biden because next year the presidential election is coming. The Biden team needs great numbers, records for the economic situation.
How the talks will go remain uncertain, but one thing is for sure, trade ties between China and the United States remain strong. Here in Shanghai, trade with the United States recorded a year-on-year increase of 3% in 2022, despite economic and political uncertainties. And China's gradual reopening will only attract more U.S. companies to explore market opportunities here. Chen Tong, CGTN, Shanghai.
Beijing has accused the United States and the Philippines of raising tension in the South China Sea. It comes after the two countries agreed that the US could use 4 more military bases in the Philippines, adding to a chain of other alliances stretching from South Korea to Australia.
The US side, out of selfish interest, holds on to the zero-sum mentality and keeps strengthening military deployment in the Asia-Pacific. This would escalate tensions and endanger peace and stability in the region. Regional countries need to remain vigilant and avoid being coerced or used by the US.
The announcement of the new bases was made during a visit to Manila by US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. It increases the number of US locations in the Philippines from 5 to 9 and is part of a defense agreement signed by both countries in 2014.
China is turbocharging its economy, marking a major step towards reforming the world's second biggest stock market. Beijing's expanding its registration-based initial public offering system, hoping it will speed up listings and corporate fundraising and boost post-pandemic recovery. Well, let's talk now to Rory Green, who's Chief China Economist at TS Lombard. Good to have you with us, Rory. So, first of all, how will this new system work?
Yes, so the new system is a massive improvement on the old application-based IPO approach, where basically the CSRC, that's China's security regulator, had to approve every single IPO and was in practice often involved in setting the price. The new approach is more market-orientated, easier for companies, and generally much faster to get IPOs approved.
So a big change. How significant is it?
It's really significant. This is another big step in the evolution of China's financial markets. We're going to see a deepening and broadening of financial markets in China as a result of this. And longer term, this is going to be a crucial part of the development of the real economy as well.
So the idea is to turbocharge China's economy. How will it do it? What will it do?
Yes, so in the short term, it won't really have a huge impact, but longer term, it's really going to help China move from an economy and a financial system that is heavily bank dependent and one that is a bit of a hybrid system using banks and direct financial markets. And that hybrid system tends to be much more efficient. You've got more diverse funding channels for a wider array of businesses. And a crucial part of this reform process, there will still be a role for the regulator, and they will in practice try and guide and screen some of these IPOs to make sure they fit with national development policy as well. So you've got a bit of a market approach, a bit of state intervention, and this will be very helpful for China's longer term growth and national policy development.
And last year, we saw Beijing allowing the US access to inspect firms in China for the first time. Is this part of the same move towards improving transparency?
Yes, yeah, it's part of this broader, more market-orientated, more transparent approach. The inspections by the PCAOB, one of the big sort of regulatory bodies in the US, that's cleared a pretty big hurdle for international investors. The current reform of the IPO system will clear another hurdle for domestic ones. So yeah, greater transparency all round.
Is there a risk, though, that opening up to all companies could potentially lead to poorer quality control with companies listing that perhaps shouldn't be allowed to?
In general, there should be a very limited risk of that occurring. The registration guidelines are pretty strict. Investors will have the opportunity to really closely scrutinize each IPO. And as I said earlier, the CSRC, the regulator, will still have some involvement. So there's a very low risk that a dodgy company with weak financials would be allowed to IPO under the new system.
OK, Rory Green from TS Lombard. Good to talk to you. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks.
Germany's biggest lender, Deutsche Bank, has reported its highest profit for 15 years. The bank made $5.5 billion in 2022. That's more than 2.5 times the previous year. Following a major restructuring, shares still fell 5% after that announcement, and bosses are refusing to rule out further job cuts.
UK steelmaker British Steel is in discussions with its workforce to cut around 800 jobs at one of its 2 main plants. Unions at the steelworks in Scunthorpe are in negotiations with the company's Chinese owners, Jinye, over the redundancies. It comes despite UK government rescue talks over a $360 million funding package for British Steel.
More than $100 billion has been wiped off the value of India's Adani Group in just over a week. This all comes after a report by the US short seller Hindenburg called the conglomerate a giant con. On Wednesday, the company abandoned a $2.5 billion share offering. The founder, Gautam Adani, has dropped from the 3rd richest person in the world down to number 16.
British Airways and Virgin Atlantic have both announced they're resuming direct flights from China to the UK after Beijing relaxed travel restrictions. BA flights linking London to Shanghai are operating from April, with their London to Beijing flights returning in June. And Virgin Atlantic's flights to Shanghai will resume in May. Last month, the Chinese mainland reopened its borders to tourists after 3 years of COVID restrictions.
And an image of the British monarch will no longer feature on the next generation of Australian banknotes. Currently, the late Queen Elizabeth is on the $5 note, but she will not be replaced by her successor, her son, King Charles. Instead, the next design will reflect Australia's indigenous culture. The new note is unlikely to appear for several years.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. If you think rising inflation is hurting the West, spare a thought for debt-burdened economies in the developing world.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities, reinvent, find new opportunities, discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference?
Brazen axe.
The difference is in the detail. The background.
Defense ministers from
The wider angle and perspective of every story. Wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top story, more pain for borrowers as interest rates rise again in Europe and the UK.
The International Monetary Fund says a third of world economies will slip into recession this year, but that the worst hit will be in the developing world. The IMF's chief says the impact of the war in Ukraine is just one factor that's hit growth prospects for the world's poorest countries. It says more than a third of countries in the Middle East and North Africa are particularly exposed to the ongoing effects of the COVID pandemic and higher food and energy costs. Well, let's talk now to Bill Blaine, who's a market strategist and head of alternative assets at the investment firm Shard Capital. Good to have you with us, Bill. So how is high inflation particularly affecting emerging and developing economies? We're seeing it worldwide, but how is it affecting those?
Well, it's been absolutely fascinating the last couple of months since this inflation trigger started to move global economies. We've already seen a number of the more struggling economies in the developing world start to really suffer the consequences of food inflation and energy inflation. Now, that is going to be exacerbated as we continue to see interest rates rise. We had the Fed yesterday increasing only by 25 basis points, but then the Bank of England move today kind of hints that despite the market wanting rates to start falling, it isn't going to happen anywhere soon. Now, it just so happens I've just got back from a business trip from Egypt, which is why my home office is so scruffy today. I do apologize. But Egypt's a good example where they've been forced to devalue, but they're doing everything they can to improve the basis of the economy, to attract in foreign investment. And once that starts to happen, you'll see more confidence in economies like Egypt. Where economies don't make changes, that's when they're really going to start to struggle.
So you picked out Egypt there, but which other countries are being hit hardest?
Well, we've already seen the crisis most visibly in Sri Lanka, but across the globe, you've got a whole number of economies that will be struggling today with higher energy costs, higher food costs. And although many of them will be commodity-based economies where they're exporting raw materials, for instance, they're going to be struggling. And that's happening in Latin America, it's happening in Africa, it's even happening in some of the developing and emerging nations in Asia. This is a developing story.
So we've seen rate rises more or less across the board in Europe, the UK, the US, trying to tackle this soaring inflation. But those rate rises are also hurting developing countries who borrowed money when rates were lower. Is that one of the main problems?
Well, one of the classic debt traps is for emerging nations to borrow in foreign currencies, typically in dollars, euros, or sterling. And then they start to suffer a adverse currency market where their currency weakens. As a result, when it comes time to repay that debt, they find themselves paying relatively far more. Now, that's often been a trap. At the moment, we're still seeing US rates rising, and that's one of the reasons that dollar strength has been such a problem for many emerging market economies. If the dollar's strong, they struggle more. Now, that will start to ease because we are seeing, we have expectations that the dollar will start to weaken later this year once we see the pace of interest rates really stop. And that's likely to be sooner rather than later. That will give some respite to many nations that are heavily dollar indebted. But debt is a global crisis. Many nations are over indebted, and if a nation's over-levered, it doesn't help confidence that economy is going to be able to steer itself into a more sustainable place. And that, I'm afraid, is going to remain the story this year, especially if the IMF is right about rising recession. But to be positive, there are very good signs that the recession is going to be less damaging than was originally predicted. Even the IMF, surprisingly, has scaled back the amount of pain it was expecting.
OK, Bill Blaine, good to talk to you. Thank you for joining us today. That's Bill Blaine from Shard Capital.
Israel has carried out airstrikes on the besieged Gaza Strip. Israel's army said the air raids were in response to rockets fired from Palestinian territory, which were intercepted. It added that the airstrikes targeted rocket and weapon production sites used by Hamas, the group that governs Gaza. Hundreds of protesters have gathered in Sydney at the funeral of the controversial Cardinal George Pell. Pell, who was Australia's highest-ranking Catholic cleric, died at the age of 81 in Rome last month. The Cardinal spent over a year in jail over the sexual abuse of 2 boys in the 1990s. But that verdict was quashed in 2020. Austria is expelling 4 Russian diplomats without providing a reason. The country's foreign ministry said the diplomats were being told to leave for behaving in a manner inconsistent with international agreements. That form of words has previously been used in spying cases. Russia has not responded.
Ukraine says it believes Russia is preparing to launch a new offensive, timed to coincide with the first anniversary of its invasion.
Russia's President Vladimir Putin is in the city of Volgograd to mark the country's biggest victory in the Second World War, the Battle of Stalingrad. Kyiv says up to 500,000 Russian conscripts may have been mobilized ahead of an attack in the east of the country, where fighting has been stalled for months.
Well, our correspondent Stuart Smith is in Moscow. So, Stuart, Russia's foreign minister has been talking about Ukraine. What's he been saying?
Yeah, that's right. So Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, has been talking about Ukraine, but also the countries that are close to Ukraine and close to Russia. And in an interview with Russian television, he described how he believed that these countries were being coerced by Western powers to try to find anti-Russian positions. He said that Georgia, a country that borders Russia and was previously at war with Russia, had resisted those attempts, but singled out Moldova, a country that borders Ukraine, as one where he saw a Western influence being incredibly ramped up. Now, Moldova was concerned by that. It said that it had chosen a future as part of the, quote, free world, and said that it categorically rejected the statement by Sergei Lavrov that this was anything but its own independent decision. It suggested that this was a continuation of very aggressive diplomacy by the Russian state, and said that it was confident where it stood in its position.
Our diplomats will do everything to ensure that any stunts planned for the anniversary of the special military operation at the end of February in New York and elsewhere, which the West is now actively planning along with the regime in Kyiv, are not the only ones to grab the international community's attention. We are preparing some evidence.
And Stuart, what's the significance of today's commemorations for Russia?
Yeah, they're really important for Russia. The Battle of Stalingrad saw around 1 million casualties amongst the Red Army, but it did mark the turning point 80 years ago during World War II, when Russia and the Soviet Union pushed back the Nazis, eventually all the way to Berlin. And so that's why the Russian president was there, to commemorate that event, which saw so much death, but was also a massive point of national pride. The Russian president said, "We stood together. The army, with the strongest spirit, came out victorious. Their success can only be explained by their loyalty to the motherland, and because the truth was with Russia." But he then extended that to the modern fight in Ukraine, back in to the special military operation, and suggested that the ideology of Nazism is again present there and is being supported once again by the West. He said that this was a continuation of that fight, but that Russia's values, tradition and its legacy would mean that ultimately Russia is victorious.
Stuart, thank you very much. Our correspondent Stuart Smith in Moscow. 3 people have been killed in a Russian airstrike on an apartment block in the Ukrainian city of Kramatorsk. Up to 20 people are thought to have been injured, some seriously. President Zelensky denounced it as an act of absolute evil. Emergency crews are searching for survivors.
EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen is in Kyiv ahead of a major summit to show solidarity with Ukraine. In a joint news conference, Ukraine's president urged the EU to impose tougher sanctions against Russia. Volodymyr Zelensky said the speed of the sanctions had slowed down and should be intensified. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent Alex Cadier in Brussels. Alex, Ukraine has a long list of requests for its EU visitors. What's it asking for altogether?
Well, you've got a number of requests there, as you said. Top of the list is probably accelerated membership to the European Union. That is the political ask. They want a closer relationship. They want further integration within the EU. Now, we saw a tweet just a few moments ago, about half an hour ago, from Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, saying that they agreed to integrate Ukraine further into the single market and including it in key EU programs. Also saying that they're going to work to extend tariff-free access to the single market for Ukraine, as well as the free mobile phone roaming provision that we have already here in the European Union. They would be extending that to Ukraine. So these are steps that the Ukrainians will welcome. That's the political side, that's the societal side. But they've also been asking, having successfully received modern battle tanks from Germany, from the United States and others, they are now asking for fighter jets. The Ukrainians asking for fighter jets from their Western allies. Mixed response at the moment. The Germans, for example, saying, well, we're not interested in talking about this quite yet. We've just agreed to send you some tanks. The US also saying they won't do it, but the French and the Dutch considering it at the moment. So that is the wish list as it stands. But Ursula von der Leyen is there not alone. She's there with her 15 commissioners. The whole College of Commissioners has gone to Ukraine, the first meeting of its kind between the EU authorities and the Ukrainian government. Charles Michel, the President of the European Council, is also present, so it's a very, very high-profile meeting for both sides. They've announced 45 million euros in a boost of funding for the EU's training mission for the Ukrainian military, the first time the EU has trained a foreign army on its soil. That was initially a 16 million euro plan. Well, it's got a big cash injection of 45 million and a reminder of a 500 million euro package from the EU for non-lethal military equipment to Ukraine and services to support the Ukrainian military. So Ursula von der Leyen has a very clear message. There is some talk of fatigue, of maybe the EU and Europe will reduce its support of Ukraine. Ursula von der Leyen in Kyiv today saying that is absolutely not the case at all.
Alex, as you say, lots of commentators looking for signs of success or failure. So what should we be looking for from this summit on Friday?
Well, there's clearly going to be a lot of talk of solidarity, of support for Ukraine. The EU has been fairly consistent in its support for Kyiv and for President Zelensky's administration and in supporting them in the face of Russia's invasion of the country. Now, that is obviously something we'll see, something you can expect to see. There will be announcements most likely of more funding, more support. We're hearing 25 million euros to help with demining in Ukraine. We know that the Kherson region has been very heavily mined by the Russians and could be one of the most mined places on earth, and that kind of money from the EU will be announced to help Ukrainians demine that particular region. But the thing to look out for is also conversations about accession to the European Union, that membership of the European Union. You'll remember that Ukraine has candidate status as things stand. That is a step forward, but there are a lot of reforms that need to take place and a lot of things that need to happen before the actual membership can be fully applied. Now, the Ukrainians say we'd like to be full members within 2 years. Even for a country that is completely aligned with the EU's rules and works in the same ways as the European Union, like Austria, for example. Austria took 5 years to join the EU after it applied. Poland, Croatia took 10 years, so that 2-year timeline seems unlikely. There's also a bit of resistance from member states discouraging the European Commission from being too vocal about Ukraine joining the European Union, because you have the common agricultural policy, which will be affected by Ukraine's very powerful agricultural industry, for example. Lots of things that still need to be resolved. So that might be one of the issues that has some contention at the summit in Kyiv tomorrow.
Alex, thank you for that. Our correspondent Alex Cadier in Brussels.
Serbia must continue talks with Kosovo on normalising ties in order to pursue EU membership. The words of the Serbian president addressing his parliament.
Both Serbia and Kosovo have applied to join the EU, but President Alexander Vučić faces stiff domestic opposition over his backing for an international peace plan, which includes conditions set by Brussels. Serbia currently does not recognise Kosovan independence. Our correspondent Alyosha Milenkovic reports.
It is one of the most important sessions of the Serbian parliament in the past several decades. Feelings are running high due to a list of requests submitted to Serbian President Alexander Vučić by the representatives of European Union and the United States regarding the status of Kosovo. But some lawmakers here say key demands within that plan amount to a Western ultimatum to recognize Kosovan independence. It is something that Serbia and many other countries around the world have so far resisted doing. At the beginning of the session, President Vučić gave a 90-minute address where he outlined the details and the possible negative consequences if the plan doesn't go ahead. These include blocking Serbia's accession to the EU, cancelling visa-free travel with the EU, cutting Western investments in Serbia, and Western businesses pulling out of the country. Opposition MPs frequently interrupted his address with shouts of "traitor." They also demanded his resignation and for fresh elections to be held, calling Vučić the main culprit for the current situation. But Serbian President Alexander Vučić stressed that if Serbia refuses to accept the plan, it could face economic isolation and uncertainty. The session is expected to last until late into the night, with protests from both sides of the argument expected to go ahead in front of the parliament building. Alyosha Milenkovic, CGTN, Belgrade.
You're watching CGTN, still ahead. The writings on the wall. The Slovakian professor inspiring his students with Chinese calligraphy.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The clean-up operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So now we've actually become the border on this road.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
The focus is firmly on future technologies.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. Have more children, have more babies. Those are the messages in China, with incentives being offered in many parts of the country.
It comes after the population fell for the first time in 60 years last year to just over 1.4 billion. Our correspondent Xu Hua reports from Shenzhen.
不愿意，不愿意，不会，不愿意，不愿意。
It's ununified now in my random interviews in Shenzhen about whether mothers will consider having a third baby. As one of China's megacities with a population of 17.7 million, Shenzhen is soliciting public opinions on the city's policy of child care subsidies. Families who have a third children or more will be offered cash subsidies of up to 19,000 yuan until the child reaches the age of 3. Those having their first and second child will be offered 7,500 yuan and 11,000 yuan respectively. However, these haven't changed attitudes much.
The cost of raising a child is very high, and we both have our own careers, so we don't have so much energy to take care of a smaller child, although this policy is very good.
We have to take care of our elderly parents and our little children. We young people can't stand up under such pressure. Living in Shenzhen is already a big pressure. There is not enough policy to support us to make money and have another child.
I'm the mother of 2 kids. I feel too exhausted and unable to take care of them well. I dare not to think about having one more kid.
I have no spare energy to take care of more children while I'm a working mother.
It takes a mother too much energy to bring a baby up, especially for a working mother. The current working environment is lacking tolerance for working mothers, so the policy is not motivating for me.
Shenzhen is one of the cities trying to reverse the falling birth rate after China recorded the first population decline in 6 decades.
Known as the youngest city in China, Shenzhen recorded over 200,000 permanent resident births in 2021. That's 25% less than the peak in 2017. According to the 7th national census, the shrinking population is expected to have a negative impact on the economy.
To meet the challenge of population decline, we need to increase the childbearing willingness of the working-age population and reduce childcare costs from the perspective of holidays, tax exemptions, housing, financial subsidies, and more. And we need to strengthen research on population growth and periodicity, promote long-term and balanced population development.
As shrinking population means a declining supply of workers, some experts are calling for more practical policies to pick up productivities and sustain the heady pace of economic growth. Xu Hua, CGTN in Shenzhen, Guangdong Province.
Chinese New Year celebrations are continuing around the world, even as far as Slovakia, where one arts professor has been inspiring his students with his knowledge of Chinese culture. Our correspondent Johannes Pleshberger reports.
Every stroke has to be perfect. Sometimes you can't breathe when you write very small characters.
During his many trips to China, Peter Kocak learned Eastern calligraphy. The Slovak arts professor is fascinated by its abstract and poetic form.
You see just few traces of ink or some color, and all artwork is in your imagination.
For over 1,000 years, the Chinese have been decorating doorways and windows with calligraphy to celebrate Spring Festival. Today, writing down one's hopes for the new year on red paper has spread around the globe, all the way to Slovakia. Prešov University is a small public campus in the rural east of the Slavic country. Nevertheless, Peter's students are eager to learn about art forms from all around the globe.
Calligraphy is beautiful, it's history, it's fantastic for us too in Europe.
However, a few years ago, university authorities cancelled the class, saying an arts course based entirely on calligraphy was too specialized for a small institution, with such specializations belonging to an arts academy.
I will fight that we will have again courses for handwriting and maybe also for Chinese calligraphy. I would like to be the bridge between China and Europe, or especially Slovakia.
Peter has already built such a bridge between museums on different continents. His calligraphy work is not only displayed in Europe, but also in China, Australia and the United States. Now the 61-year-old says he is only a few brushstrokes away from re-establishing a calligraphy course at his university due to high demand from the students. Johannes Pleshberger, CGTN, Prešov, Slovakia.
The headlines again. More pain for borrowers as interest rates rise again in Europe and the UK.
Oil giant Shell more than doubles its annual profit to nearly $40 billion, one of the biggest profits in British company history.
And turbocharging China's economy, Beijing's IPO revolution to try to stimulate the market and accelerate recovery.
That's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
Coming up next on Africa.